Anthem is Bioware's latest attempt at making a video game. In a lot of ways, this felt like history repeating itself for me. Take an extremely talented development team who were responsible for creating one of the most influential science fiction video games of all time, then fast forward to their newest creation, which winds up being a confused, half-baked, unfinished mishmash of disparate ideas that try to appease every type of consumer but wind up not really satisfying any of them. Somehow Anthem simultaneously feels as if it was created in a vacuum, while also only existing to piggyback off trends that have been rippling through the industry in a not-so-subtle attempt to help themselves to a piece of the slowly moulding lucrative pie. And I don't know about you, but I don't even really like pie. It's probably going to be the most controversial take in this whole video. Now, despite how negative I'm probably already sounding, that didn't take long. I think there is more to discuss about Anthem in terms of what works and what doesn't. It goes in depth a little more as to why most agree that the story is bland, and as to why a lot of the fundamental design choices basically make no sense at all. Believe it or not, I found some elements of Anthem to be strangely compelling at times, for reasons I'll get into shortly. But first, there are a couple of things I need to mention before we delve deep into this extremely messy game.
Just spill it already.
Please bear in mind that considering so many games are now designed around you playing them for ever, that live service games like this often change and are updated over time. So please keep an eye on when this video was uploaded before leaving a 20-paragraph long comment about how wrong I am or how improved everything is from the point in which you watch this. You of course are allowed to do it, and please feel free if I do make any genuine mistakes, which I'm sure I will.
I'm only human after all.
I know a lot of people find it frustrating that when I talk about Destiny, one of the other shared world looter shooters, I focus so hard on world building and narrative. But aside from basic gameplay feel, it's one of the more important aspects that keeps me engaged in a game. Sorry, I'm not an objective reviewer for IGN that has to consider every single type of player and every different way to play the game. It's just what I like and enjoy about games. If you don't agree, that's fine. No one is forcing you to validate or watch my video. It's just, if the story and world is uninteresting, badly told, or lazily constructed, then chances are I won't get much out of it. In this instance, especially considering Bioware's history with story-based RPGs, I think it's more than fair to approach the game from this perspective. I'm sure I'm not the only one who expects a certain caliber of storytelling from this company. I've already mentioned Destiny, but I'm afraid the comparisons are not yet over. There are just too many similarities to 2014's vanilla Destiny for it to be coincidence. And I don't just mean the looter-shooter aspects, I mean the overall design, the same balance of fantasy and science fiction, its story, enemies, and all the way to its bizarre Destiny-like hub worlds. The reason I think this comparison is important is because nearly everything that was wrong with Destiny at launch all those years ago is nearly exactly what is wrong with Anthem today. Although amazingly, I think Anthem actually gets more wrong. I'm sure you could go back to my original Destiny video and change every time I say Destiny to Anthem, and the overall point probably wouldn't even be lost. I labeled that game the organized mess because the presentation was so slick, stylish, and intentional that you could get basic enjoyment out of the game purely from its gameplay loop, despite its shallow story and content-light design. But here with Anthem, it's not even an organized mess. It's just a normal mess. A pretty one at points for sure. God, it's breathtaking at times, but still a mess. And I don't quite understand how they figured that they could get away with it considering the fact that the competition is so rampant now. What is the point of copying Destiny, which has evolved and learned from its past mistakes in certain ways, if you're then going to copy the already ancient, out-of-date original Destiny? Why would anyone choose to play worse Destiny when they could just play Destiny, or Warframe, or The Division, or even Borderlands 2. The end product kind of feels like a freakish mutant of multiple different creeds. Let's be a story-focused classic RPG with dialogue options. You know, the thing our fanbase has come to expect from us. No, let's be a free-to-play cosmetic microtransaction-funded looter shooter that you also have to pay for. No, let's be a 4-player co-op open-world action game. Ugh. I would not be surprised if we eventually learn that this game was originally supposed to be a typical single-player Bioware story game, but was forced into its current being to impress and/or appease EA shareholders. It would make sense, considering that this game was supposedly in development as soon as Mass Effect 3 was over, and the landscape was completely different at that time. Or maybe they just misread the tea leaves, I don't know. In Anthem, you play as a Guardian. Oh, sorry, wait, no. Here they're called freelancers. In Anthem, you play as a freelancer.
Are freelancers.
Freelancer.
A guy or girl who is very good at flying a robot suit around and killing scorpions. Your character has no name, so everyone awkwardly just calls you Freelancer.
Freelancer. Freelancer. Freelancer.
Freelancer.
Freelancer.
Freelancer.
It's like if you became friends with a firefighter and every time you saw them you said, "Hey firefighter," instead of just calling them by their name. Thanks for putting out fires, firefighter. You play as the unimportant chosen one, and by that I mean the story has to juggle you being incredibly crucial and capable at everything you do, but not so important as to explain how you can do co-op missions with 3 other random firefighters who just show up out of nowhere to assist you. Yeah, it really adds to the power fantasy to know that every other player in the game is also the chosen one super soldier, doesn't it? Yeah. While I sit here and try to recall what actually happens in the story of this game, which will have spoilers by the way, so be warned if you actually care about that, it's worth noting that if you're willing to invest in this universe, there is one major thing you have to get used to. And a lot of science fiction properties do this, but get used to otherwise meaningless science fiction mumbo-jumbo buzzwords and names such as the Legion of Dawn, Javelins, Shapers, Corvus, Scars, Freelancers, the Dominion, Antium, the Regulators, the Shield. Get the wiki ready because you're gonna need it. It's all interchangeable fluff that hurts your head after a while if you don't do a lot of reading to understand the bare essentials of how the universe works. Hey, at least this time we can do the reading in the game. At its core, the story is exceptionally simple. The only thing that makes it hard to follow is that they drop you in a seemingly random point in history without any real context, and just expect you to follow along. It falls into the trap of having a lot of characters excessively explain huge chunks of the world's history to characters that should really already know it. It's just a bizarre choice to have such an impenetrable, dense world with so much history, detail, and lore, but at the same time being one of the most simple, widest appealing genres of game there is. You've already created an in-depth science fiction world with MacGuffins that can explain anything, so why not put your imagination cap on and give us a more interesting way to introduce us to this universe? Oh sorry, my mistake. I guess co-op and loot is more important. That decision really paid off, didn't it, fellas? Anthem is set on an unknown planet that is littered with hulking ancient artifacts and relics from a race of godlike beings called the Shapers, who abandoned the planet for unknown reasons. So think the Reapers or Protheans from Mass Effect or the Forerunners from Halo. Yeah, a rather tropey setup for sure, but I'm okay with it as long as they can make it interesting. These abandoned artifacts harness a powerful energy source called the Anthem of Creation, which is theorized to be the source of all life. That's why the game is called Anthem. The thing that makes these abandoned relics interesting is that they are inherently unstable because of how advanced and difficult to understand they are, and as such are prone to messing with the fabric of space, spawning scary monsters, and all sorts of nutty science fiction anomalies that can conveniently explain where all these things that you need to shoot come from. It's also a handy MacGuffin for the writers to use to get them out of any corner they've stuck themselves in. This Shaper abandoned world is kind of like if a builder came round to your house to fix something, but left all of their scary looking power tools on and never came back, so you had to scramble to turn them off before they destroyed everything. I actually really like this setup for a universe. There's a hell of a lot of potential for creative storytelling, and I'm sure in a single player game, we would have seen some of that. They don't do a very good job of explaining it in-game, but long before the start of the story, humanity was enslaved by a bunch of creatures called the Urgoth, which led to humans using Shaper technology to invent the mech outfits which are called Javelins, which in turn allowed them to defeat the Urgoth. I have to admit, I'm not too keen on goofy names like Shapers or Urgoth, but Javelin is an extremely good noun to assign to the suits in the game. Big thumbs up there. Javelins are used to keep the peace, as it were, to explore the unknown landscape for research and reconnaissance. Right, so after all that, I think that's enough information to get to the start of the game. Jesus Christ. You start the game as a new freelancer who's on their very first mission, a rookie.
Let's go, freelancers. Suit up!
The goal of said mission is to stop a Shaper relic called the Cenotaph from destroying everything.
Okay, everyone. Let's stop this cataclysm from growing. From killing everything.
I don't know why they insisted on naming the relic the Cenotaph right away and not just referring to it as a powerful relic, because it makes some of the early dialogue dumps extremely difficult to keep track of while you're still learning the ropes. The crew is severely underprepared and it all goes wrong. Most of the freelancers are killed, and you forcefully make the last remaining survivor flee from the battle.
Hey, we're coming back.
No!
You beat us, Helen. We need to regroup.
They can't beat us. Rookie, don't you dare pull me out of here.
Because your team failed the mission, people stop having faith in freelancers, so they start to fade out of existence for some reason.
We lost the faith of the people we protect. So the freelancers scattered, searching for ways to redeem themselves.
Then it cuts to 2 years later. So, if we can go forward that hefty amount of time, why was stopping the cenotaph so important at that moment? If it was genuinely that dangerous, surely they should have spent more time studying and preparing for it before going in? Whatever, just don't think about it, I guess. After the 2-year time jump, you're introduced to the single-player hub world called Fort Tarsis.
Back in Fort Tarsis, the last stop on the Bastion frontier.
Named after the famed Javelin pilot, who gave her life to defeat the Urgoth all those years ago. For some reason, they decided to present this area in first person, meaning that every character interaction and cutscene here is from this strangely detached perspective that is supposed to be more immersive, but ironically feels more distant and unnatural. And seeing as when you're in combat you're always in armor that covers your entire body, you very rarely actually get to see the main character and connect with what they look like. It's especially off-putting when you're locked into long discussions with people without any perspective changes, camera angles, or any filmic technique that is used for the exact reason of making dialogue feel more natural, interesting, and authentic. It doesn't help how robotic the POV camera movements are either. When this is supposed to be the view from someone's eyes, it shouldn't look like they're on a dolly that's weightlessly gliding around to keyframes like a machine. This, matched with how good the face animations and motion capture are, creates this strange uncanny valley feeling, where you're seeing these incredible character models who look and move like real people, do repetitive animation loops that make them feel like Chuck E. Cheese animatronics. They clearly have developed some very impressive technology over at Bioware, but within these confines, within this game, are held back from what they could truly be.
You gotta look past the numbers for once in your life. Something is off.
You're properly introduced to your cipher called Owen, who expresses how he one day would also like to be a freelancer.
If I had a suit of my own, I could be out there in the field with you.
Dial down your boosters, hotshot. With more training, you'll get your chance. I promise.
Ciphers are briefly explained as being people who are particularly sensitive to the anthem of creation, making them capable of telepathic communication. So using that power, they sit in animus-looking chairs and act as support roles to Javelin pilots. It's basically an overly complicated way of explaining why pilots have a guy in a chair to talk with on comms. I don't mind the concept of these ciphers at all. Quite the opposite, there's a lot to explore there. I want to know about it. But again, they do a pretty poor job of establishing any of this without you doing copious amounts of reading and research on your own time, when it's kind of an essential piece of world building to understand the basic mechanics of the story. I'm sure some people will be okay with this, but for me, if the world building isn't intertwined with the story, why should I care? A couple of times they mention that ciphers shouldn't be freelancers because their psychic abilities will make them go crazy or something.
Almost every cipher who's been near that storm has gone mad. We put you on a javelin and try to reach the cenotaph. You'll get us all killed.
But again, it's never really explained as to why that is the case. Everybody in this universe already knows why, so they never talk about it. Anyway, I haven't really talked about the characters yet, but Owen is one of the better ones. I liked his enthusiasm and his performance, and he even sells some of the pretty bad dialogue.
What kind of monster doesn't like celebrating their birthday?
Exactly. And yours is soon. It's just past. It's today. It's today. Happy birthday!
I'm not too keen on where his character goes, and it can be a bit much sometimes, but he was one of the aspects of the game I found myself genuinely interested in, to see how he'd be explored or developed, because I actually understood what his goals in life were and what his personality was.
Life's what you make it.
You really believe that?
Yeah, I do.
I envy you. I'll have to think about that.
Seeing as we're on the subject of characters, I cannot go any longer without mentioning how much I passionately hate who you play as. The freelancer is such a dull, annoying, droning, archetypal character who really adds nothing to the experience at all.
What have you done this time?
Nothing. My armor's fine. Probably. I hope.
I'm mixed on silent protagonists, but I think I honestly would have preferred for them to shut up permanently if I had a choice between this or not.
Get glitched.
My biggest problem is that your character doesn't really stand for anything, has no real flaws, interesting motivations, or anything that is required to pull you in or invest you in a story. At least if you were silent, you could inhabit your own values and live through the other characters, but when your unnamed protagonist is so badly written that you'd rather have them basically be non-existent, then you've kind of destroyed the access point that is supposed to ease us into this expansive, intimidating universe. At first I thought it was the voice acting that was bringing it down. I even changed from the male voice actor to the female one to see if it was any better. But it really is the direction and dialogue that let it down. It's not the voice actor's fault at all.
Get glitched.
I'm so sick of cocky, too cool for school protagonists who treat everything as if they're too epic to be there, almost as if they're self-aware that they're the star in an action video game. Oh, here we go again. Here's more enemies. Oh, let's see where this goes.
There are a few less Dominion who'll be bothering us.
It's obnoxious, lacks any kind of subtlety, is grossly cheesy and eye-rolling, and often straight up ruins scenes that otherwise could have had some weight, drama, or class to them.
Get glitched.
Some lady shows up and gives you a mission to go and save an arcanist, which is essentially just a scientist or researcher. So you go and do that.
Matthias?
Here, right here. These scars. I don't know what to think.
I know I haven't mentioned gameplay yet, but don't worry, I'll do that once I've finished with the story. It will just be simpler that way, trust me. Once you've rescued the Arcanist called Matthias, you're treated to probably the worst, most clumsy cutscene in the entire game. And that's saying something. The moment that truly made me realize, oh, it's gonna be one of these. The game comes to a screeching halt to have some guy you barely know talk at you and vomit exposition that explains yet more backstory to give you basic understanding of how this stupidly complicated world works. The work I've already had to put in just to ensure that you watching can even understand what the hell is happening is proof alone at how clumsy this entire introduction is. This nearly 6-minute long cutscene desperately tries to convince us that an enemy faction called the Dominion are a threat we should care about and be scared of, while at the same time characterizing them with a pitiful description that lists them as only cruel conquerors from the north.
Until one day, the Dominion arrived on their doorstep. Cruel conquerors from the north.
Wow, that's a lot to dig your teeth into, isn't it? I'm shaking in my boots, honestly. Don't tell me they're cruel. I don't want to deal with anyone who's cruel. There's a big, boring fight where characterless robots jump around and blow up other characterless robots. I'm sure every 14-year-old's gonna love this scene. When really, all you need to know is that there's a relic underneath this city that the Dominion believe could harness the power of the Anthem so they could control it to be ultimate gods, effectively. But obviously, it all went wrong and became this disastrous cataclysm, the same one that you tried to stop at the beginning of the game. This kind of would have made more sense if this was how the game opened, to be honest. Sort of like a Lord of the Rings opening backstory. So in the end, we wind up with this 6-minute cutscene describing a conflict we have no investment or understanding of, told by a character we know nothing about, shown from the perspective of someone we also don't know and never get a chance to know. The structure of this game is so incredibly bad, it might actually be worse than vanilla Destiny was. The game makes you experience free play next, where you aimlessly fly around the open world without any efficient way of navigating it or being able to place waypoints, where you have to gather ember pieces. I don't know who decided that this type of activity was ever acceptable to break up main missions. The only way I see it is that it's an artificial way of making the story feel a bit longer, as well as teaching you basic ways to interact with the game. Next, you're sent on a mission by the boring lady to meet with one of her agents who has been acting undercover in a smuggling gang. Don't worry, it's really not as interesting as that sounds. It was around about here that I decided to play the story missions in single player mode, instead of the default public expedition setting that automatically fills your lobby with random strangers. Now, as much as I enjoy playing with Fart Prince and Fart Simpson 94, a lot of people have fart-based usernames. I did at least want to see what the main story was like from a single-player perspective, despite every design choice doing everything in its power to stop you from playing alone. I also noticed that it's possible to join missions that are already partway completed when you play co-op, so I obviously wanted to avoid that so I didn't miss anything. I also got so sick of bored players rushing through as fast as they can and pulling you along with them. You get less XP when you play by yourself, and whenever you try to start a mission solo, it double checks to make sure you haven't made a foolish mistake, because how on earth could anyone enjoy this game alone? Hey, I didn't say it. The game did. In trying to find this undercover agent, you're treated with a cutscene that properly introduces the Monitor, who is the main villain of the game. He's got a cool, threatening voice and looks like an action figure I'm sure any young boy would love to own. But I was interested to learn more about the guy. Tell me what makes him tick. Why is he so hell-bent on gathering these artifacts? I'm open, I'm willing to learn. And I'm sure the answers to all of these questions are going to be really, really satisfying. Maybe he'll be as memorable as Saren or the Elusive Man. Those guys were great. Yeah, I'm sure he'll be memorable. Yeah.
No, that's not how we conduct business. Negotiations have concluded.
The Dominion really have returned.
In force.
Damn.
The game encourages you to do some side quests for a while, which I don't mind the concept of in premise, but the repetitive mission design really holds it back. It hadn't properly sunk in at this point though, because it was still early days, and I was getting enough enjoyment from experimenting and learning the gameplay that it wasn't quite getting on my nerves yet.
No one survives the Heart of Rage.
You did.
Your next quest is to meet back up with your old comrades that were briefly shown at the very beginning, who have been researching a way to stop the MacGuffin. After lots of killing, you find your old friends, but the one named Haluk still holds a grudge against you for making him retreat in the opening sequence of the game.
Who is this Haluk?
No one.
This cutscene is tonally quite strange. They play it for laughs because this guy has to eat a scorpion stinger.
Forgive my ignorance, Princess. I didn't know people could eat this.
I come from a harsh and unforgiving land.
Then you have to eat a pheromone sac.
I love Manticore.
But then a couple of seconds later, the camp is attacked and you have to fight a bunch of Dominion. So you go from dramatic to comedic to more drama, back to comedic, then you're surrounded by violent murder, all in a couple of minutes. What a tonal mindfuck. I have to say that now these new old characters are in the mix, the story does get a lot more interesting. Not because the plot really goes anywhere because of them, but the dynamic between the now 4 main characters actually has something to it. I think it's a shame that you're not more familiar with Faye and Haluk before seeing them again, as this moment could have been significantly more dramatic and impactful, instead of being a funny. At points it feels like they tried to cram the material of at least 2 games, or one 20-hour single-player RPG, into one small experience, so a lot of the story feels rushed and unnatural as a result. But that's not to say there aren't sparks of the Bioware I used to enjoy so much, it's just unfortunate that instances of quality storytelling are so few and far between. My enjoyment of the game did especially improve every time the character of Haluk was on screen. He has an infectious energy to him, his performance is good, and I really like past their prime characters who are full of regret and cocky pride in themselves.
Faye and I have 2 years of research and legwork on this, and you want what? Jump in the end and claim credit?
I really feel that if given proper time and development, some of the characters here could have been truly memorable and interesting, even with how much I hate their costume design. What the hell is this? Why do they look so stupid? Your character informs Haluk and Faye that you're going back to the Heart of Rage.
I'm going back to the Heart of Rage.
Really?
The Dominion wants a cenotaph. Corvus hired me to get it first.
And they reluctantly agree to band together to get the job done.
One job. Just one.
Faye informs you that there's an ancient suit of special armor with unique shields that should be able to help you get through the Heart of Rage. And now is possibly the worst mission in the entire game that most people are in agreement on. It's really, really bad. I think they've fixed it a little bit, but it was still really bad when I played it, and that's all I can talk about as my own experience, so. You're tasked with exploring 4 different tombs in your search for this special javelin, but before you can enter any of them, you have to complete trials, which doesn't sound too bad on paper, but no, these trials are nothing but tasks such as revive 3 people, open 15 treasure chests, collect 10 collectibles. Menial tasks that usually would be relegated to nothing more than optional side quests or challenges, but for some reason are forced upon the player to gatekeep and inflate playtime. I think that's the reason. I can't think of why they would choose to do this. Maybe they didn't want people finishing it too quick, I don't know. Completing these trials is frustrating enough, let alone how irritating and tedious it is, navigating the open world. Just to get around, I had to continuously open the map just so I could tell if I was heading in the right direction. I was so intensely bored through this section of the game that I, honest to God, nearly abandoned playing it, and hence the video. But I got through it after a couple of wasted hours grinding in the open world. What fun. Yeah, I'm really going to suggest to my friends that they should pick up Anthem. Yeah, when you have missions like this. Eventually, you finally head to the final tomb to find the javelin. There are some pretty rudimentary puzzles you have to complete to unlock a door to mix things up a little. They're never actually challenging, but I appreciate the idea, I guess. Variety is the spice of life and all that. Once you kill some scorpions and do more puzzles, you wind up in some kind of burial chamber, where a coffin opens and gives you yet another MacGuffin to try and keep track of. Jesus. We are multiple layers of MacGuffin deep now, and I'm pretty sure there are more to come. I'm afraid there's no turning back now. You can't escape the MacGuffins in Anthem. The monitor comes back and projects himself into the same room as you, which I guess is something that characters can do in this world, whatever. And goes slightly more into his motivations. He basically just wants the ultimate MacGuffin, the Anthem, so he can be ultimate. His motivation is paper thin, and it's not very interesting, and it gets no more development, and he's just a bad character. It's as simple as that. Although what bothers me even more than the dull, uninspired writing is having to watch two comical, toy-looking mech people try and have a conversation as if it's normal. Tell me what is interesting about two characters whose faces you either can barely see or never see, showing no emotion, talking about nothing interesting, having no personality, while they're trying to sell this flowery sci-fi mumbo-jumbo garbage. Nothing is the answer. Nothing. Oh yeah, and we can't forget about...
Get glitched.
It's too bad. It's too bad to let that go. They say that you're surrounded by the Dominion, and it's built up as if there's going to be an exciting escape sequence.
Faye, when you said there were Dominion outside, did you mean all the Dominion?
Just run. You need to get out of there. Fast.
Think about how cool this could be. You could be flying through an action set piece while you're being chased by soldiers and you're having to dodge left and right. Oh, it could be so much fun. But no, you just sort of fly in a straight line. And then the mission ends. The only time truly exciting things happen with javelins is in cutscenes that you have no part of, no control over at all. Would have been quite nice to play this, really. Huh. Looks a lot more interesting than what you actually get to do. Yeah. There's a decent cutscene where Halleck puts his differences aside and finally welcomes you aboard.
We need you if we're gonna pull this off. So welcome aboard.
Halleck, Thanks.
I'll get the Strider moving.
And Owen gets in a swap with you.
What do you want me to do? Just stand in the corner and look pretty again?
Keep an eye out for the monitor.
And if he shows up?
No one can get inside the fortress but us. Whatever turns up, I'll make sure we're ready for it.
Good luck with that.
Owen, hey.
Because you have to keep reminding him over and over again that he's not allowed to be a javelin pilot because it will make him go crazy. Because remember, he's a Cypher. I think that's what they're called. Cypher DS. He's a Cypher DS from Attack of the Clones. It was here that I noticed some strange inconsistencies with the setup of the hub world area, where you can have optional conversations with characters who have a speech bubble icon above their heads, which have minor little choices you can make, which don't really do anything significant, but they're still there to remind you, hey, remember when we did things that were good? I went over to Owen, who happily greeted me with,
Hello, good to see you.
You're in a good mood.
It seems I've become a bit of a celebrity.
even though moments ago, as you probably remember, he just angrily walked away from me because he was so upset with how I was treating him. It's quite weird, isn't it? This is clearly a product of how open the game design has to be because of the looter-shooter gameplay loop. I suppose they have so much to worry about, this must have been missed as an oversight. Yet another example of how the multiple different design philosophies fight each other at every corner and ultimately hurt the end experience. Next, you head over to the Fortress of Dawn, in the seemingly never-ending hunt for this bloody javelin. This mission acts as a way to build up the history of the universe a little bit, in a way that is less on the nose compared to earlier. You place the signet you retrieve from the coffin into a mural, and you're pulled into some kind of alternate reality where you have to prove that you're worthy of this special javelin. This was the first time in the entire campaign where a little bit of creativity seemed to be coming through. Oh look, a new way of showing me something by having me play it. That's neat. It's nice to be a little bit surprised after doing hours of the same repetitive tasks over and over. And even then, all you actually have to do is kill a Titan, which at this point is still quite exciting. But it is surprising how much the context can enhance or weaken a gameplay moment like this. Unfortunately though, there's always a negative with this goddamn game. Because I was playing solo and on normal difficulty, and with this encounter clearly being intended for 4 players, it took me about 11 minutes to take the boss down. It wasn't particularly hard, it just had an obscene amount of health. To the point where I was starting to check my watch. Like, come on man, why is this taking so long? I get it's strong and powerful, but come on, give me a break. Safe to say, whenever I played solo, I changed the difficulty to easy to avoid this happening again. The second trial I found to be more interesting story-wise. Again, the gameplay design is effectively no different. You simply have to hold ground and defend a point. But I like the idea of how you were put into the shoes of the famous javelin pilot who earned her reverence by doing this exact event in the past. Still, it would have been better if you were forced to relive famous historical events in a more literal way. But with these games, I'll take whatever world-building granules I can get. They're pretty stingy. The final trial is basically just your initiation into this godly circle, showing you flashbacks of past events from the game. It's kinda neat. I would have enjoyed more inventive stuff like this throughout the story. They clearly avoid it though because every mission has to be playable with 4 people at the same time, and there always needs to be action all the time, otherwise your friends might get bored. Finally, you awkwardly swagger into the resting place of the javelin you need. But...
Faye, are you there?
Faye can't hear you.
Owen!
Oh dear. Javelin not working, huh?
That's a shame. Click.
What the hell are you doing?
Oh, come on, mates. Isn't it obvious?
So Owen betrays you, and I have mixed thoughts on this. On one hand, it does sort of make sense considering how he's mentioned throughout the entire game, pretty much from his first cutscene, how he feels entitled to some greater responsibility, and every single time you shoot him down. And his plan to deliver the javelin to the monitor so he leaves the fort alone isn't even that stupid. No more stupid than trying to stop it himself.
No more waiting, no more putting me on the sideline. If I side with the monitor, he'll leave the fort alone.
How can you help the Dominion? You know what they've done.
I know exactly what they've done.
However, while the story does everything in its power to make this moment feel like a betrayal that's earned and makes sense, it doesn't sit quite right with me. Perhaps it's because the development of the character is surface level at best, and you barely get any idea of the relationship that the protagonist is supposed to have with him. So from our perspective, it's not even that extreme. Considering what we're told the stakes are, people do dumb things when they're scared, I guess. Or maybe it's because the setup of two hulking, power-armored humans trying to have a dramatic scene is so incredibly stupid looking that it's hard to take it seriously. Oh my god, this is so dumb. And let alone the fact that your character can only muster a feeble...
Damn it.
Luckily, and I quote, most of the seals are keyed to the general signet. Jesus Christ. Meaning that even though Owen took the javelin, he can't do anything major with it. Okay, if you say so. It's convenient. So the new objective is to build your own parts based off what Faye analysed from scanning the Javelin of Dawn from when you're talking to him.
Wait, Faye, are you suggesting we build our own Javelin of Dawn?
Not the whole javelin, just the relevant seals, but yes.
Give you the plans, I can build it.
So you're Arden Vassa for us now?
Why not? I've built whole javelins from scraps before. Now we're just gonna make a couple seals. Might have to jump over a few flaming chimeras first, but we'll get it done.
Hey, flaming chimera jumping is chapter 1 of the Freelancer Handbook.
The story comes to somewhat of a standstill again, as you're given the task of gathering materials and contacts. You have a choice to assist characters called either Matthias or Dax. I chose Dax first, who is a somewhat irritating princess or something. That was her story. She's a princess. What the hell is happening?
My aunt left a journal. She was onto something big. No. Legend has it.
What is with the comedy in this game? It's so bad. Does anyone find this funny? Like, genuinely? You're effectively sent on a side quest where you investigate a site where people have been mysteriously vanishing. It has some neat scenery and helps to build up the mystery of the relics a bit. I'd show some footage, but about 2 hours of my video corrupted for some reason, so it looks like this. You can still hear the sound though.
I always miss the good stuff.
Still time for you to join us.
Love to, but these scars are really mean. Stay alive, or I'll avenge you.
Oh yeah, but then the sound in the game broke, so I even lost that. Great. Speaking of which, I had the sound completely break about 3 times in my 20 plus hours of game time, which required a hard reset every time to fix. Thank God it never happened during a cutscene I actually needed the audio for. That would have been very, very annoying. While we're on the subject of bugs, I may as well briefly talk about my experience with them. For the most part, the game was okay. However, there was a general lack of polish to most aspects. I think it's quite clear that this game could have used more time cooking in the oven. It wasn't uncommon to spot visual glitches or enemies disappearing for no reason. And I know this isn't exactly a bug, but those pre-day 1 patch loading screens were so bad that I just quit playing until its official release. It was obviously a mistake to release the game in the truncated and confusing way that they did. It's done the overall perception absolutely no favors. It's all anyone's talking about. The loading screen simulator. I think, to be fair, the loading screens are just fine now on PC for the most part. I can't speak for console, of course. However, they are ugly and look terrible, and break up the continuity and flow of the gameplay. They even made these loading screens where you're kind of suiting up like Iron Man, but they get interrupted by loading screens. Why didn't they just have those be the loading screens, man? That's way cooler. Everyone likes to complain about the ship loading screens in Destiny, but at least in that game it keeps you grounded in the world, and you can still access your menus and customization while you're waiting. Once you've completed Dax's quest, then you complete one for Matthias, who is interesting because he starts off as a pretty bland and pedestrian character, but through the events of the story wind up being a lot better. This is because you retrieve some kind of relic that messes with reality to the point where Matthias gets split into 3 parts.
Matthias?
Was this new?
with each one of them embodying a different extreme aspect of his personality. The dynamic displays some character that the game desperately needs. It's refreshing to see a character who's more unique and isn't supposed to be too cool for school or a badass all the time. Once you've completed all the separate tasks, you can finally assemble the Shield of Dawn. You're informed that the Monitor is making his move towards the Heart of Rage, but the seals Halleck has made aren't properly working because he must be missing some important detail from the design of the Javelin of Dawn. What a confusing sentence.
I got the seals ready, but they don't work.
Explain.
Everything's a spec, but they don't activate, and hell if I know why. Something's missing from the design.
There is no time for this.
The growing pressure causes a fight to break out between your gang, mostly because Halleck can't admit that he's not capable of being an all-powerful freelancer anymore, and that he can't do everything himself because of his pride.
You so damn sure?
I know you can't! Both of you stop! We don't have time to waste fighting each other.
No. We don't. Get out of my way.
Halleck, wait.
You go to talk to Halleck, but he's done a runner and flown off in his own javelin to the Fortress of Dawn from earlier, probably hoping to find the missing detail they need to finish the job. You track him down and he reveals that Owen saved him from a surprise attack from the baddies.
This looks pretty impressive.
It was Owen.
Owen!
And he has a corny monologue while they awkwardly sit on a wall, again showing how stupid it is to try and have emotional cutscenes take place while they're in ridiculous over-the-top Transformer outfits. I don't know why this just doesn't work for me. Owen shows up and explains how he tried to use the Javelin of Dawn to get into the Heart of Rage, but it malfunctioned and left him disfigured. He genuinely apologizes for what he did, but he's not sorry enough to give you the Javelin of Dawn. But he is nice enough to give you another MacGuffin that should now make your shields work. Then he flies away and you never see him again. Bye-bye. This whole sequence feels rushed, and something about it feels very awkward and convenient. There are just so many questions, so many details that are left untouched. Why? There's so much potential drama here. You've just thrown it all away. You've pissed it away like a fart in the wind. When you get back, at least, there's a nice scene where Halleck apologizes for being a hard ass, which basically completes his arc in the game. He's the only character I can point to as an example of someone who actually changes and learns something. Everyone else basically stays the same, apart from that guy that was ripped into 3, but that doesn't really count. This is probably why I actually enjoyed his character, because he feels like a person who, despite his flaws, can put them aside for something more important. A bit of nobility and weakness goes a long way in creating likable characters.
Thanks for the kick in the ass, partner.
We're at the end of the story now that the Dawn Shield is fully functional, so you head back to the Heart of Rage from the beginning of the game. I was kind of disappointed with how similar this area is. It doesn't particularly come across as if this area is on the verge of collapse any more than it did the first time you were there. It could have aided the sense of urgency if the contrast was a bit more extreme. I'd heard through the grapevine that this last level was supposed to be quite good, if not one of the only good levels in the entire game, so I had high hopes for something exciting. However, while the environment is something fresh compared to the previous hours of the game, you're still effectively doing the exact same thing as the other missions, fighting the same enemies, killing the same boss, protecting objectives, flying around collecting orbs. The only real thing that makes it stand out is the final boss.
You may have beat me here, but I am silencing the cenotaph. Wait, he's not here. The monitor's dead. The story fizzles at this point, almost boldly admitting that they've done basically nothing to develop an interesting villain, so how about he just turns into a big monster so you have to fight him, because that's how video games have to end. There you go. Fight him, shoot him, blow him up, whatever, the end. First off, his design feels more like a strike boss from Destiny instead of the ultimate enemy, the final conflict to end all conflicts at the climax of the game. The fight is somewhat enjoyable. You have to battle in a couple of different arenas and he uses a nice variety of moves that keep you on your toes. You don't really get to kill him though, because once the battle ends, Halleck and Faye crash their 80-80 into him and win the day. Faye uses her cipher powers to disable the cenotaph, and you unplug it like a laptop charger. And the Heart of Rage is stopped, I guess. Right, roll credits. The final bit of story of note is kind of like a PS at the end of the credits, a Marvel stinger, where they show that some soldiers found an Urgoth scout pissing around somewhere, teasing that these enemies will make an appearance at some point in the future. That's if the game isn't a complete bomb, of course. It's a weird scene because they don't really seem to be worried that a potentially powerful force of creatures are coming to destroy them.
We'll be in touch.
Hey, I mean, if you don't care, I don't care. So that's it. That's the story of Anthem. If we go off the apparent 5 to 6 year production cycle of this game, then that's nearly half a decade of work. For this.
Get glitched.
A plot based around an event with no real looming threat or suspenseful countdown, with characters who range from being cookie cutter, interesting but underdeveloped, or straight up dreadful, unlikable, and bad, in a poorly set up world that has interesting elements here and there, but with none of it being introduced in a satisfying or conclusive way. All in all, the whole thing is kind of about nothing. The most you could say is that the story is about working together as a team, which is literally on the same level as fucking Yu-Gi-Oh! It barely even feels like the Bioware I used to adore so much. I cannot stand this trend of having lore over an actual story. We don't get attached to these universes because of the lore. The lore is supposed to be additive, that once you've experienced a story, there's more to explore on your own terms. It's all mixed up now. Without a compelling narrative to draw you in, what is the point? I know the point is that it's supposed to give context to the repetitive looter-shooter grind, but let me pose this question. Is there anyone out there who genuinely thinks that this game right here would not be better served as a single-player game? A single-player game that would have more cutscenes, more character development, more focused mission design, a longer, more spread-out introduction to the world, impactful choices that make the game replayable, etc., etc. Everything that makes these experiences worthwhile and memorable. It seems to me like a significant amount of development time was spent trying to solve issues that were only created because the game is a shared world looter-shooter. If from the beginning they were willing to do what they're actually good at, as opposed to following industry trends, then maybe we could have had something special here. Instead, we got this. The reason I've barely mentioned the gameplay at all is that the gameplay loop almost feels completely disconnected from the main story. It's like with every loading screen, you're playing a different game. And I know a lot of the time the reason people get attached to these games is because of a satisfying endgame loot grind, so I guess it has to be mentioned. However, I really don't think there's anything special about the reward structure of this game. I could totally understand wanting to replay missions over and over again if you were privy to countless customization options for your javelin, or fun and distinct weapon options that suit different playstyles with unique attributes that are fun to collect and experiment with, but in my opinion, there is none of that. You'll probably notice that throughout all of these clips that my javelin basically looked identical at the beginning as it did at the end, aside from when I was trying out different types of javelin, which is completely insane to me, considering what the hook of the game is supposed to be. Like, isn't that why this game exists? What? I have to say that the different classes of javelin is easily the most interesting and fun thing about the game. They all feel completely unique and fulfill different roles that suit vastly different playstyles. I gravitated mostly towards the heavy Colossus, where you're effectively a flying tank with a shield that you can toggle on and off to absorb damage. The weight, sound, and feedback of the javelins feels incredibly responsive. The traversal animations are also extremely impressive. The subtle touches of movement and takeoff honestly never gets old, and the way they allow you to gradually unlock and experiment with every type of javelin is extremely enjoyable. It's surprising to me that they didn't follow this same philosophy for the guns in the game, seeing as there's no need for major PvP balancing that understandably holds back some of the wackiness of the weapon design in games like Destiny. They could go crazy with weapon designs. Think about how creative they could get considering the never-ending potential of the setup of Shaper technology. Javelins are supposed to only be possible based on harnessing this unknown power, so show it to us. Get inventive. They touch on it a little bit with some of the Javelin's super abilities, which are powerful attacks that are on a cooldown that you can use occasionally.
Watch out for the flamethrower!
It's literally identical to Destiny and the supers. The best looking one is easily the Rangers, where it locks on and shoots out countless missiles, which feels satisfying every time. If there was anything I did kind of enjoy about the loot, it was that you actually unlock different attacks for your javelin, so you do get a pretty wide arsenal of different attacks to choose from. Do you want a flamethrower, a sticky grenade, a mortar? These things are fun to choose and customize, and do dramatically change your approach to combat. And as far as combat goes, the feel of shooting is pretty much spot on. Every shot packs a punch and the sound and feedback are just right. But here comes a problem again, in that what you're actually shooting at is not only very uninteresting from a story perspective, but their visual design is so incredibly incredibly bland, that at times these creatures feel like they're stock-bought assets that Bioware just paid for from a store. There are only 3 factions, as I'll call them, of enemies. The Dominion, who are mostly foot soldiers with a couple of more interesting monsters to fight. The Scars, who are nearly identical to the Fallen from Destiny. Like, I'm surprised this isn't lawsuit material, they're so similar. Who in lore are supposed to be a colonial swarm of insectoid monsters that mimic whatever the dominant life form of the area is. How does something with such an interesting description with so much potential wind up being the most throwaway generic enemy type? I don't know. They're given no proper introduction and no development beyond easily ignored exposition during missions that most people won't listen to anyway because they'll be in a Discord call with their friends. Lastly, there are just miscellaneous wild animals and monsters, things like wolves, scorpions, and beasts. I do like the idea of having wild animals in these open world maps. It makes them feel more alive, and it's something I've wanted to see in Destiny since the beginning. Moth people. Honestly though, the concept art for the moth people that didn't even make it into Destiny has more personality and charm than anything that made it into the final version of Anthem. Even the Urgoth, which they teased at the end, looked like a thrown away Mass Effect design. This is basic bottom level stuff they need to get right for a shooter that is intended to be replayed infinitely. You take out nearly every enemy in the same way, and the AI never does anything that interesting or challenging. Honestly, I think this gameplay would be fine in short bursts. Much like how the gameplay in Mass Effect was never incredible or anything, it did its job. But even the Mass Effect 3 multiplayer had better customization, more interesting guns, better enemy designs, more varied locations. Ah yes, locations. Throughout the entire game, you're effectively on one map, which is beautiful at times, but I can only take so much of flying through the same looking jungle over and over again, with the only break being dungeons and caverns that either look like caves or ancient Shaper ruins, so even they get repetitive. The map has a couple of unique looking areas, but it also lacks any memorable landmarks to help you orient yourself. As neat as flying around is at first, and it really is extremely fluid, it feels great, it eventually becomes little more than a means to an end. You are somewhat limited in what you can do while flying. Air combat and dogfighting is bafflingly not something the game even attempts to explore, and your time in the air is restricted by an overheat bar that will ground you if it fills. An idea which could be a fun mechanic in premise, having to cool your javelin down by flying through water so you don't plummet to the earth, but in execution with what you're actually tasked with doing can be more frustrating than fun. You're able to hover for a limited time in battle, which is a nice touch, but it seems that in giving you such freedom of movement, the Bioware struggled to actually design missions around it. Half the time you're grounded because the objective demands it, or simply because they literally force you down with no-fly zones. So in essence, this flying feature they showed off as being the main hook of the game eventually becomes little more than a means of transport from A to B, basically no different to the sparrows from Destiny. Collecting floating orbs, standing in a circle while a bar fills, and playing a game of hot or cold with a radar is pretty much the only other tasks you'll be completing in almost every activity. The game really does feel like they designed the movement and shooting first, then work backwards. There's nothing to do here. And as far as actual endgame content is concerned, it's incredibly light. You unlock a game mode called Strongholds, which are kind of like a mini raid or strike from Destiny, which ideally would be the main activity you'd be grinding to level up and get new gear, but at the time of me making this video, there are only 3, and that's with one of them just being the reused assets from the last level of the game you would have already played. I enjoy the bosses in these events because they're more bespoke, but the lead up to them is virtually no different to the usual types of missions you're handed out by characters at the fort. I just don't understand how this game got past a design document. It's a single player game with a half-baked story. It's a looter shooter with no loot. It's an open world game where the map is empty, and it's a co-op game where you can't even communicate with your teammates without adding them to your friends list and talking to them in a party. Surely variety in combat, location, and loot should be at the top in terms of importance for games like this. Anthem is like playing the mind of a teenager who's going through an identity crisis. It can't settle on what it wants to be good at, so winds up being either mediocre or bad at most things it attempts, aside from basic aspects like gunplay and movement that should be assumed to be good anyway. I was never on board the hype train from the beginning for this game, which always kind of confused me as to why it existed. The game always looked average, and guess what? It came out average. And I'm not sure it's good enough to write it off saying that it'll be good in a year's time. Well, if that's the case, then why are they charging full price for it? If you really want, release this shell of a game as a free-to-play with microtransactions or something. Or, I don't know, finish it before making people pay for what is effectively an unfinished beta? Honestly, I've never been so split completely completely down the middle about a game before. I hate about half the characters, I hate about half the story, I hate half of the loot systems, I hate half of the customization, I hate half of the music. The other half is quite exceptional though, the music does have some good tracks. And I hate half of the gameplay. I can't properly compliment anything without bringing up significant caveats. And really, I question if this game will even be properly fixable, unless entire systems are redesigned, and quality of life changes completely overhaul the game. I still don't think Destiny has ever fixed its story problem, but I do think they have identified what they're good at and focused on refining the most important aspect of all. It's shooting and it's looting. Bioware needs to identify what they want this game to be and commit to it, which I'm amazed I even need to say because that's not usually how products work. That is literally the game designer's job, quite literally. I'm still not convinced that these shared world games are or will ever be capable of telling what I consider to be a decent narrative, and it's a shame that all of the countless hours the various writers, artists, actors, coders, and so on have spent on the game has wound up in such a forgettable, ultimately pointless product. It's not a game I can say I got really anything out of. I never got particularly angry aside from a couple of instances, but I will never think about this game again, and I have little to no interest in taking part of the grind. Why should I? In its current state, I simply don't think it has earned any more of my time. Besides, if I leave it now, I can just come back in a year's time and it'll all be fixed. And by then, I'm sure I could use the XP.
Yeah, you could use the XP.
There are things I haven't even discussed, such as the combo system, crafting, or the bizarre way stats work, but the game never really properly explains any of it, in a way I'd consider satisfactory, so I really don't feel educated enough to comment on it. What does it matter anyway? Unless you're hardcore into this game. Also, why did they go to the effort of creating this underwater mechanic if it's basically completely pointless? It looks so neat when you're underwater too, such a waste. The character and personality of this game is non-existent, and you may not believe me, but I did start work on this video with a more positive outlook. I know it's crazy. But as I started writing, I was noticing more and more issues to the point where I don't really know why I bothered playing it in the first place. I don't think there's a worse thing you could say about a game.
Get glitched.